Financial independence, the FIRE movement.
70% of Americans have less than $1,000 in savings.
It's really about thinking about the kind of life that you want and seeing your money as a tool to enable that vision to come to life.
We hear it literally everywhere.
Instead of buying a house, we actually put our savings towards building a portfolio and investing. And as a result of that, we were able to retire at the ages of 31 and 32.
But what does financial independence really mean to you? At the core foundation, passive income that's earning you income while you sleep is able to cover your costs of a living. And this is the definition of financial independence. But the problem goes a little bit deeper. First of all, we're going to talk about how much you really need to be financially independent. Does it even exist? Let's dive into the weeds and find out. Over the past few years, since I started exploring and graduated from university, I started becoming more and more interested in the idea of financial independence. It's something I really strived for and something I really wanted to achieve. And now I finally had that ability by earning a little bit of money, although it wasn't very much at the time, to kind of start working towards that goal. Naturally, this sent me down a route of thinking about how much I could live off of the very bare bones to cover my costs, and then how much I could save on the side or even invest in order to start growing my portfolio for my financial independence journey. One of the most concerning things that I've come across and also obviously experienced myself, as you might have as well, is the reduction of friction in terms of consumption. I came across a TED Talk recently that spoke about this notion of reducing friction in consumption by large retailers such as Amazon that allows one-click purchases and makes it so much easier to spend your hard-earned money rather than put it in your savings account or investing account and working towards financial independence.
And that's when it hit me. Friction. More specifically, the lack of friction points is the reason why it's so hard for us to fight the urge to consume.
The crux of his entire idea was that friction was so much higher back in the day. For example, maybe 20 years ago, if you wanted a new sweater or a new pair of shoes, you'd have to go get in your car and drive to the mall and then use cash to pay for that sweater or shoes and then come all the way back. So this whole thing was like a 2 to 3 hour ordeal. But now it literally happens in a span of maybe 2 minutes because your card information is saved, your information on where to ship to is saved, shipping is free and fast as well, so there's practically no friction. I just mentioned another point where friction has been reduced very significantly, and that is the use of plastic. That's right, using your credit card or debit card increases spending by so much because if you are carrying cash and paying with cash at the mall, you only have a finite amount of it in your wallet, and the friction to getting more of it is pretty high. So if you're in a store, you don't have enough money, you kind of leave it and don't end up buying it. So it's a lot easier to buy it now when you have a credit card that has a limit that might be even more than your savings. Essentially, we just keep swiping until either the bank gives us a call or we check our credit card statement, whichever comes first. Hopefully the latter, not the former. The reduction of friction has made it so much harder for this generation and everybody who's involved in this economy to strive for financial independence and save and invest properly. Let's think about financial independence a little bit more deeply, and that's kind of the route I've been going down the past couple of weeks. If it really does mean the fact that passive income is covering all of your costs, what are kind of the limitations to this, and are there ambiguities? What are the boundaries of this? Let's start with the most obvious thing that you're probably even thinking right now, and that is if we are going to be covering our costs, and financial independence takes a span of several years or maybe even decades to achieve, our cost of living is probably not going to be the exact same that it is today. And that is a really big problem, especially when you consider things like lifestyle inflation, which honestly could be a video on its own, and maybe I'll do a video on this in the future. But it's the idea that as you earn more money or have more in savings, you also increase your cost of living to match that. And it's very, very hard to avoid lifestyle inflation. Even those that are very good at it do see very small increases in their lifestyle consumption and their overall costs, because that's just how it works. That's our human psychology. To get an idea of this, think about somebody who is in university.
I'm broke as shit.
Living on the very bare minimum, maybe even student loans where they're very stretched thin in terms of cash. And then a couple years later where they're, I don't know, working in investment banking or private equity or any other field like medicine or being in law, where you can earn $400,000 a year. Chances are they're not going to be living with the same costs as they were in university. And that's just a simple example. It's human nature. The second issue, very related to this, is the idea that's a very big pain point these days, inflation. And inflation is something that's so pertinent in the economy right now that you kind of have to think about it when you think of any kind of future planning. Even considering an inflation rate of between 2 and 3%, which is typically the target for the central banks of any country, we can be looking at 10 to 20, maybe even 50% over your lifespan, or maybe even as little as a decade, that you have to account for when you're aiming for financial independence. So if you're covering your costs today, and then you want to be able to do that in 10 years, where you're aiming for to hit that financial independence goal, you're gonna fall short. You're gonna have to work longer at it to be able to achieve that. Another problem with financial independence in its very own definition is the difference between needs and wants. And obviously you want your costs, your basic living costs that is, to simply be your needs and not necessarily your wants, which should be covered by active income, at least until you earn financial freedom. Let me explain. So if you're thinking about something that's a need, for example, something you'd want your passive income to cover, you might be thinking about transportation. But it gets kind of tricky very quickly. You have a car and you drive to work. Could you take transit? Probably yes. But is that technically a need to be driving to work? You'd probably also say yes, although it's not really a basic need. You could take transit and get to work. Even something like your morning latte at Starbucks, it's so nice to be able to get a coffee in the morning, and at 8 a.m. it probably feels like it is very much a need. I can definitely relate to that. I'm quite the caffeine addict myself. This isn't a need. You can make coffee at home. You can have tea at your office or wherever you're going. Now the important part, how can we overcome these obstacles in measuring financial independence? And this, it turns out, it can be kind of tricky, but I have some solutions that might help here for you. So starting with the first one, where we consider current costs versus future costs, we can kind of break this down and make it a little bit easier to reach financial independence more quickly without fully redefining what it means. What I recommend you do is to use your current costs as kind of your first goal for financial independence. For example, if you have a fixed number of $40,000 that is your current cost of living, this should be your first goal to reach in order to reach financial independence, your FI1 goal, I suppose you could say. So once you reach $40,000 per year, regardless of what you're spending the year that you achieve that, that is considered that first level that you've achieved. And after this, you can set a new goal where it can cover your dream costs, as I like to call it, or FI2. And that's kind of that next level goal that you can aim for after that first one has been completed. Okay, so now for the fun part. When you're aiming for that FI2 goal or your dream costs goal, it's still going to be your costs that you want your passive income to cover, but this is going to be your absolute dream life. This is super fun. In various books, including The Psychology of Money and even Money Master the Game by Tony Robbins, they talk about this idea of pricing out how much it would cost on a monthly basis to live your dream life, and they emphasize the idea of how much less this number actually is than people expect it to be. Doing this for large fixed expenses that you would want to have covered in your FI costs, you would do something similar to how a company would calculate amortization or depreciation, if you're familiar with that. And so what this does is it breaks it out over its lifetime into monthly payments. So for example, if you buy a car that is supposedly a need or a cost you want to cover with your financial independence 2 goal, what you would do if, for example, it costs $60,000 and you're expecting it to last 5 years, you can break this down into $1,000 per month. Similarly, if a vacation costs $12,000, you can also break this into $1,000 per month. And this is if you want to do a vacation like that once per year. If you want to do it more often, more expensive, you can give or take, but break it down into monthly costs and total them all up. It's really fun. Sit on the couch on a lazy Sunday and just kind of go through it, go through everything you'd want to have in your dream life and sum it all up, and then aim for that in terms of your second financial independence. And even that first financial independence goal of covering your current costs can seem like a huge mountain to scale, but honestly, what I've found to be so fun and really keeps the ball rolling in terms of working towards that goal is to have very micro goals in between. And that's something like just paying for a meal out each month with your passive income. If you're earning dividends that is $50 worth every single month, give or take, because they're paid quarterly, of course. But if that ends up being $50 per month, you can go out for dinner with a friend or with your loved one, and you can pay for that with passive income, and that feels great. So aim for something like that first, and then move to something bigger like your rent payment or your mortgage payment, and then eventually it's going to cover all of your costs. Dealing with inflation, honestly, if you just want to focus on covering one cost at a time, over time you'll realize that these costs are getting a bit more expensive, and it might take a little bit longer to reach that financial independence goal, that first one where you cover your current costs, but overall it shouldn't make a huge dent in your overall savings. But if you do want to account for this, you can tag on a couple of percentage points to each cost if you want to until you reach that first goal. For your dream costs, however, this is something that's so ambitious and so high-end that the income that you're going to be earning from both passive and active income at that point really would mean nothing in terms of inflation. So I personally don't calculate that. You absolutely can. If you think that your dream goals are quite a ways away and inflation is going to be a large factor, you can save an extra 20 or 30% to account for that. For the discussion on needs versus wants, honestly, what I've just found to work so well is doing the analysis for financial independence based on what you value, because a value is very closely aligned to a need. Because if you value something, it's much more worth it than something that you don't value. So I would focus on that. If a cost happens to be something that's a little bit more out there and you don't really think it's a need, but you value it very highly, I would also add that into your financial independence calculation. Although not very traditional, this is something I like to do. For example, things like going to the gym or buying healthy food or having a nicer place to live. These are all things that mean a lot to me. So it's something I value, and therefore I factor it into my financial independence calculation. But things like going on extravagant vacations, buying a huge home, or having multiple drivers, for example, I don't know, I'm just spitballing ideas here, but that's not something I care about. I don't value those things, so I would not add that to my financial independence calculation. Again, just want to emphasize that needs here can be things you value, things that help you feel alive and make you thrive physically, mentally, and spiritually. So just keep that in mind and make sure you factor in some of those things as well, because that's very important. Don't forget that FI is about tailoring a life that you want to live. You should be seeing it as a game, something to work towards, something as an end goal, something that you're excited about. So get building on your stock portfolio, your dividend portfolio, real estate portfolio, whatever portfolio it is that's earning you passive income right now. Keep growing those out, diversify different passive income streams if you can, and that'll get you to FI so much quicker than you think. And these little tips and tricks will help you get there and have less ambiguity. Use that passive income, cover your Netflix subscription, maybe go out to dinner with someone. If you can cover it with passive income, that's the first step, and then go up from there. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this one, there's another one you'll like right here.